So good. This session is AgTech Powerhouse, and really it is that technology is coming more and more into agriculture. It's coming more and more into all our lives, depending if you like it or not. And really, particularly in agriculture, whatever, we see in farming at every level, both farming, primary agriculture, and as you move up the food chain. And we'll discuss that. We're going to have a conversation on that probably at the end, but I want to go first into introduce our three guys and probably get them to talk a little bit about themselves, a little bit about the careers that they chose, why they chose it, and where they've ended up, where they have basically in this AgTech powerhouse that's driving forward and what element they have in that. I'm going to start first with John Daly. John is Rural Innovation in Dairy Master, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Dairy Master. They have a stand here today, and John's very happy to be sitting down for a while because, I mean, he's been doing a lot of talking, and Michael as well. They said they'd be like to sitting down for half an hour. But really, I suppose, John, tell us a little bit about, I suppose, where you grew up, where you came from, and then what you chose to do in college or what you chose to study.
Okay, so I grew up in County Cavan, a small rural area. Grew up in a dairy farm, mixed dairy and suckler. Probably knew from a very early age that I wanted to do engineering. I was always helping my father with fixing machinery or building silage trailers or such things. And I was lucky enough that even in primary school I probably wanted to do engineering, and then in secondary school I settled on mechanical engineering. Then it was a case of, well, where am I going to go to college? And I looked at the different colleges, and I ended up picking University of Limerick, partly because they had the cooperative education program, so there was 9-month placement. I know a lot of the colleges do that now. At the time, they were probably one of the few that was doing it. So I ended up going to Limerick and did mechanical engineering there, graduated in '97. Worked in a number of companies in Limerick after that. Did my PhD part-time then while I was doing that, so evenings and weekends. And then got my PhD in design optimization. I think it was 2005 I graduated there. And spent a while abroad, worked in Switzerland, and came back then 7 years ago to move to Kerry and started working with Dairy Master.
I suppose I want to bring you back again. I mean, you said at the start that you knew from an early age that you want to do mechanical engineering. I know a lot of young people, whatever, they probably don't know exactly what they want to do. How did you know, and I suppose, was it growing up on a farm that helped make that decision, or?
I guess growing up on a farm, there's always an opportunity to help fix things because things usually end up breaking. So and my father was good at that, and he would help neighbours fix their equipment and that too. So I was always exposed to it. And I guess I showed an aptitude for it. I had an understanding of it. When it came to figuring out, well, why is something not working? I could understand how it was supposed to work and why it wasn't. So that's probably why I was intrigued by it. I was intrigued by how machines work and how mechanics work and mechanical systems work. And that's why I picked mechanical engineering.
Yeah. And I mean, when you were looking, why did you pick UL? You were saying that...
Primarily because of the cooperative placement program.
Yeah.
So I knew I was going to get work experience through the course, so that then when I graduated, I'd already have some work experience.
That led on to, as you said, 4 years in that.
Yeah, so when I graduated, then I went back and I worked for about 4 years with the company that I had done my placement with. I spent some time in the States with them as well, and back in Limerick. And then I moved on to some different companies in Limerick at the time. I ended up going back into UL to work as a postdoctoral researcher when I was finishing my PhD, and spent 3 years at that, and then I went abroad.
And was it a conscious decision at the time? I mean, there was jobs in Ireland, but was it a conscious decision that you wanted to travel?
I always wanted to travel. I specifically had an idea in my head. I wanted to live in a German-speaking area and learn German properly. So I studied German in secondary school. And while I was interested in it, I hadn't done enough to be very good at it. So I knew I wanted to live in a German-speaking area for some time and force myself to learn the language properly. And then it was a case of looking to get a job that I was interested in. So I ended up getting a job in Switzerland. I probably would have gone a lot younger, only that I was still doing the PhD. And I obviously, for my own, personally, I couldn't leave until I had the PhD finished. So then when that was done, I went and spent a couple of years abroad. In the meantime, met a Kerry woman and ended up having to come back to Kerry to get married. She wouldn't come over there to Switzerland to me. So
that was the decision to come back. And then I suppose when you came back, I mean, how did you end up in Dairy Master, and what role did you have in Dairy Master starting off?
So some of you may be familiar or may have heard of Dr. Edmund Harty. He's the CEO in Dairy Master. Edmund and I were in the same class in college in UL. We graduated at the same time. So I was friends with Edmund from early on after going to Limerick. And when I came back then, moved back to Kerry, I was speaking with Edmund and ended up doing some work in R&D. Started working there as an R&D engineer, and then a number of years ago progressed to R&D, essentially R&D manager. The title is Research and Innovation Manager, but essentially it's R&D manager.
So, but it's not preliminary mechanical engineering. I mean, your role spans a lot of different areas.
No, within R&D in Dairy Master, we have a broad range of engineering disciplines. So there's mechanical engineering, and that covers mechanical design. It also covers production support. We have technical support. We have electronics design, and we have software design. So software covers everything from embedded, right through the mobile app development, cloud computing software, desktop applications for the farm, and then our own software for our own internal production controls. If you take any of the equipment on the farm, a control pad, for example, there's mechanical housing around that. It's controlling a mechanical system. But within that housing, there's an electronics PCB board. And on that PCB board, there's software, embedded software. All of that gets developed in Dairy Master in Kerry. That system may be communicating with a parlour PC, it may be communicating via the cloud, and communicating data eventually to a tablet or a mobile phone. And again, all of the software that's needed to do that is also developed in Kerry.
And I mean, do you currently travel a lot in your own role now?
I do travel a bit, so if it may be to different countries for training for our dealer network, if there's a new product being rolled out, to help with sales. So you might go to one or two initial sales calls, helping the salespeople with technical questions. We go to trade shows, either where we're presenting at a trade show, or else I may go to industry trade shows where I'm looking to see what new technologies are there, and what companies like our suppliers are presenting, so that then we can see where the new developments are that we can then take back in and incorporate into our equipment. So in terms of travelling, it comes in fits and spurts. The autumn time of the year is busy from trade shows where we're presenting. So it starts with the SPAS in France, and then immediately after that we have the National Ploughing Championships here. This year now, it happens every 2 years, we have Eurotier, which is probably the largest cattle-based agriculture show in the world, and that's every 2 years in Germany. We're presenting at that again. I'll be there for the week. And in the springtime then we have more probably of the engineering shows that I would attend as a visitor, looking to see what's new.
Might move on to you, Sean. I mean, Chief Executive of ICBF. Tell us a little bit about, I suppose, where you've started from, and I know you travelled, you went to America for a few years as well.
Yeah, so I grew up on a dairy farm near Mitchelstown in County Cork, and went to school in CBS, and then went to UCC to do a commerce degree. And I suppose a little bit different to John, the reason I did a commerce degree was I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I wanted to keep my options open, and commerce was going to be reasonably general. So at the end of the degree, I got the opportunity to get a scholarship and go to the States to do an MBA and work for a retail company in Philadelphia. So
was that a big decision, or was it something that you knew you wanted to go to the States, or you wanted to travel?
Yeah, I when the opportunity came up, I didn't think twice about taking it. So I had been into the States the year before on a J1 and really enjoyed it. So I was very anxious to go back when the opportunity came up. Yeah. Got a green card, and so headed off, and so I went to Philadelphia, spent a couple of years in Philadelphia, and then joined Anderson Consulting, as it was at the time, now Accenture, and got into systems implementations, finance systems implementations, and was traveling over across and back to US. So I did that for about 3 years, and then came back in '98 and went to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers here in Dublin. More or less doing the same thing. I ended up traveling around Europe doing systems implementations. But I suppose I had come back from the US to come home, and I found out I was nominally working in Dublin, but I was actually out of the country all the time. So ended up coming back. I did a project in Cork, and got married, and then we said we'd stay in Cork. So at that stage, then the opportunity came up, the database, and the database was just getting off the ground in ICBF, and they were looking for somebody to manage that project and help move it on. So that's what I went. I went and worked with the database, and yeah, I've been there since 2002.
But you've had a number. I mean, you went to manage a database for a project, basically. But I mean, now you're CEO. So I mean, what happened in between? What steps? I mean, what are the roles that you have within the company?
Yeah, so I suppose the project, it was a project. I suppose the database project is one that's never going to end. You know, that project is ongoing. But after I coming back and when I joined ICBF, I also went and got my accounting qualification. So actually in 2006, I became financial controller of ICBF, as well as having the responsibility for the database. And then Brian Wickham, who did the hard yards at the start and got the whole show off the ground, he retired in 2012. So then I took over from him in 2012.
Yeah. And I'll come back to the ICBF and the database because it's important around this AgTech powerhouse. But Michael, you know, InfoPharma, you're here, you've been on a stand all day trying to encourage people to do courses in InfoPharma. Tell us a little bit about, I suppose, your growing up and how you ended up where you are now.
Yeah, again, I'm from a dairy farm in North Kerry, and unlike John, I knew I was never going to be an engineer. I was the one that broke the things on the farm, so I probably knew my future was in science rather than engineering. And I did a BSc in environmental health in Carl Street. Probably, if the truth be told, for a safe option, the public service at the time. But when I graduated, realised that that wasn't really what I wanted, so I went into quality assurance in the meat industry, and I worked in Meadow Meats in Rathdowney for 2 years. Then Rangeland Foods in Monaghan for almost 11, and then in Green Isle Foods in Portumna for 12 years. 3 years ago, I took the opportunity when it arose to, I suppose, pursue my own consultancy business. So what I thought was an opportunity where smaller companies needed the expertise I had built up over the years, and but didn't want that on a full-time basis. After a couple of false starts, which all startups are, I think, I've been working with InfoPharma Labs on pretty much an ongoing basis for the last 2 years, where InfoPharma Labs would have helped upskill people into the pharmaceutical and med devices businesses, and when they looked at it, realised that a lot of their graduates were actually going into the food industry, which continued growing through the recessionary periods. They asked me to come on board to specifically design courses for people who were just leaving CERS to get into the industry, and people with, that was on a level 6. We did a level 8 for people with diplomas, so that again, and this year we're running a master's with, all are done in conjunction with IT Tala, and we believe achieving good success, where we're getting 70% of our graduates have worked within 6 months of finishing with us. When you consider these all came off the live register, it's a different way of doing it.
You said you were going to get a sales pitch in, so you got that in there now.
Yeah, that's over the way.
That's over now, whatever. But I suppose before we go on to AgTech, I mean, looking back at your careers, I mean, is there any advice you give of people starting off, whatever? You know, there's a lot of young people in the audience, a lot of people looking to change careers as well. I mean, is there any advice you'd give to them, you know, from what your experience? John, I'll go.
First thing I'd say to a young person who's trying to figure out what to do at college is, if you can find out what you're interested in, if you follow your interest in whatever it is that gives you a buzz, that's the most important thing. You spend most of your week at work, so you have to enjoy it. So whether that's, if it's software, if it's electronics, if it's business, if it's meeting people, whatever it is, try to follow what you're interested in. Don't be worried about, okay, such and such a job is, there's good money to be earned in that today. By the time you come out of college, that job might not be there, or might have changed radically. So follow what you're interested in. If you're interested in it, you'll be good at it, you put in the effort, and you'll get on. So,
Michael?
Absolutely, I agree. Someone else earlier said that it's never hard work when you're doing something you really enjoy. The hours might be long, there might be difficulties, But once you're getting the buzz out of it, happy days, you'll go for it. And whereas if you're in a situation where you're doing something because it's inverted commas a good job, you don't like it, can be torture. And that would be my advice. Find out what you like. And okay, you have to work hard at it maybe to make a career, but there is a career there for people who go after what they really want.
Sean?
I suppose I would say in terms of looking for jobs, don't always go for the big blue chip name, because what you can find is that, especially earlier in your career, you could find that you'll end up slotted into a very narrow role and you won't learn a whole lot. If you go to a small or a medium-sized company, chances are you're going to have much more exposure to different parts of the business. You're going to build skills in different parts of the business, and I think you're going to learn a lot more, and you'll have time afterwards to go after the blue chip names and potentially the money. Focus on the experience and the breadth of experience early in the career.
I'm going to move now on to, I suppose, technology, and this is what this is about, and technology is the future. I mean, we've seen, you know, the mobile phone has come out now and we can't be without it. I wouldn't ask people to turn it off. I know they'll quieten it, but no one can nearly live without it. And really, I suppose ICBF has been held up as one of the huge successes of big data for farmers. The use of, you know, farmers put in the data when they tag that calf. They're starting a chain of events that follows it through, that gathers information. So talk through, I mean, I suppose they don't really interpret, you know, ICBF with big data, but a little bit about that story and how technology is actually making it easier for farmers and the advances.
So I suppose back when the database was getting off the ground, 2000, 2001, you know, the people that we're involved with, effectively there were 30 different organizations with 30 different individual databases, which meant that for farmers who were dealing with multiple numbers of those people, whether they were milk recording organizations or herd books or AI companies, they ended up having to supply data to multiple different sources. And inevitably, it was more work for the farmers. There was a lot of manual at that stage. Most of the records were coming in on paper. And inevitably, then there was a lot of inaccuracies. So, I mean, I remember back in 2002 when it came in, we were loading milk recording records from the milk recording databases and calf registration records from the department systems, and there was 60% of the calving dates were different. And it wasn't anybody was deliberately messing it. It was just a fact of life of recording data multiple times in multiple different places. So by virtue of consolidating all of those 30 databases into one database, we automatically had, you know, a significant block of data that had been gathered up over the previous 20 years or so. So following on from that, then we've developed very good links with the Department of Agriculture, very good links with the meat factories, with the marts, and literally all of those records, every animal movement, every animal that goes to the factory, every animal that goes to the mart, all of that data is gathering, and it's gathering on a daily basis in the background. And that has, you know, given a big boost to the data and to what we can actually do with the data then. I suppose in 2009 then there was a major change with the advent of genomics. And effectively what we were doing was we were taking a sample, and at that stage the records were 800,000 pieces of data. So every animal sample that we got, there was 800,000 pieces of data associated with it. So this year now we're genotyping as part of the beef genomics scheme. There's going to be 350,000 animals genotyped. So the volumes of data, I mean, the data that has been gathered over the last 40 years, that data has been doubled in the last 3 months, and it'll double again in the next 3 months. And that's the scale of the data that's actually doing. But the reality is, to most farmers, that actually doesn't matter. They don't care. They don't want to know. Our customers do not want to know. They want us to crunch that data and get that data back down to 1 or 2 or 3 figures that they can use to make a fairly informed but relatively basic decision. And that's going to be, that's the challenge in terms of big data. Yeah. You know, getting all that big data back down to 1 or 2 or 3 very simple instructions for a farmer: do this, do that, do the other. Yeah.
And as you say, the data is going to continue to grow. And so when you were project managing that, I mean, what type of people were working on that project? And I suppose the different careers people look at. I mean, was it software design? You know.
I mean, really two different categories. That we have PhD geneticists, people that would have maybe done ag science in UCD and then maybe done a PhD in Moore Park. So that was one. They were working on the genetic side, and then basically database programmers working on the other side, dealing with we run an Oracle database, so just dealing with the data and building the skills as they go, and the technology is moving very rapidly as well. So the capacity of the databases to deal with the bigger volumes of data, and essentially the capacity has changed, but the overall mechanism of dealing with the data hasn't changed that dramatically actually over the years.
Yeah. And John, moving on to you then, I suppose technology, the way you're trying to bring technology into farms, and I know you were looking for software designers and all different types of, jobs or people for jobs at the moment.
Well, I suppose similar to what Sean has said, there's no point having a lot of data unless you're going to do something with it. So how can we take the data and actually get something meaningful for the farmer out of it? Give him a piece of information that he can then act on, that he can make a decision and make a more informed decision and get the data exactly when he needs to make that decision. And we would link up with ICBF as well in terms of, we have launched recently the Commander, the milking point controller, where we can take in the milk recording results and actually present to the farmer when he's milking the cow, present to him the last milk recording results for that particular cow. So then he can see, well, is this a cow that has mastitis that needs to get treated? Maybe she's had a number of infections, so there's no point treating her. And again, he can make a decision there and then, rather than getting milk recording results by post in an envelope that ends up sitting on the desk for a couple of weeks before he gets around to opening and acting on it. So it is all about trying to see how we can pull that information and help the farmer make a more informed decision exactly when he needs to. It might be a decision you need to make when you're in the pit. You have a couple of minutes at most. Or it might be a decision you're making looking at the performance of your herd over the year. And you want to see, well, what should I do different next year for the next breeding season or for feeding over the winter or so on.
And I mean, Michael, for quality assurance, how is technology being brought into that to improve it?
Well, I suppose if you go back to the 80s, early 90s, everything was on paper. And like the similar story, inaccuracies all over the place. I suppose it was really driven by the farm to fork concept. If we take it, the need for traceability has never been higher. The need for compliance, for tracking yields, products. I suppose the drive for compliance and traceability, even, God forbid, through to product recalls, all this data becomes utterly critical. And I'd be confident enough in predicting that what we're doing now in the food industry, in 3 years' time, it'll be completely different with regard to how we gather data, how we manage data, and again, how it's going to be interpreted and all the rest. So it has come on a long way, but I think we're only starting a journey rather than seeing getting towards the end of it.
And I mean, this whole push towards traceability, is that now a requirement? I mean, who's benefiting? Is it farmers, processors, or is it the consumer?
Oh yeah, I would contend as the consumer that has this certainly for the food industry has been consumer driven. I suppose one of the questions that will probably come to the fore more is what's actually been done with the information. If you take it, we have loads of information which tells us that this mince product of 1,000 kilos came from 50 different farms. That's traceability from farm to fork. I think the next challenge is how are we going to start actually using that a lot better.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I think, say, paper, there's still a lot of paper-based records in the business. I'd be confident enough in predicting within 3 years that that'll all have gone on to soft copy rather than the hard copy. Again, no more than what was mentioned earlier because of all the errors inherently in it and the drive for compliance and improvement that's now almost in the industry daily.
Mm-hmm. And John, I suppose there's a lot of technology coming, a lot out there. I mean, what's limiting it getting onto farms, or, I mean, what's the biggest limiting factor?
Okay, if we take adoption of technology on farms, and a myth that gets put out there sometimes is that farmers are slow to adopt technology, and we would say that that's not the case. Farmers will adopt technology the same as everyone else, but it has to make business sense, and it has to provide or deliver value for their business. So from our point of view, trying to get technology on the farm, you're basically trying to show that you're delivering value to the farmer, and to make that business case that it becomes a no-brainer for him, that it makes more sense for him to invest in this technology, that he'll get more out of it. If we look at technology and where the industry maybe is the one that's really going to benefit from the technology, then a barrier there is who is going to pay for that? Because to put the technology on the farm, obviously there is a cost. There's a cost to businesses like ourselves that has to produce it and try to market it, and there's a cost to the maintenance of that equipment on the farm. So if it's only an industry value add, then one has to see, well, how could the industry support that? So that's probably a barrier, and it may be a barrier that maybe has to come into play with regard to traceability and so on as well. Because if you talk about technology from the point of view of improving traceability, whether that with milk or beef or so on, unless the farmer's getting a value add from doing it, there's no incentive for the farmer to implement that on his farm. So maybe that's something that we as an industry need to think about.
Okay, we have a few minutes left, so I suppose I want to look into the future a bit of crystal ball gaze. I mean, looking 3 or 5 years down the line, I mean, what kind of technologies or what do you see coming in industry and farm in the future that a lot of these people will be working on, will be at the cutting edge of?
More and more, it's more automation, more data, faster decisions, better decisions, more connectivity. We all know whether it's Facebook or whatever it is, all our information and Twitter and that, it's all there and it's there straight away. Be the exact same thing with cows, and maybe even more so, that you'll have that information to hand straight away. So you'll be able to, rather than saying that something has happened to the cow, that'll be predicted, that something is going to happen to this cow. So you take preventative action rather than reactive measures. And likewise then on the farm output level, on food quality level, that you actually we're actually able to predict in advance what's going to happen, so that we can take corrective measures before anything goes wrong.
And Michael, then in industry, what do you see as the steps forward in technology?
Well, I think it's the use of the information is going to become a lot more. I think the first step is probably, as I said, a move away from paper to soft records, so that driving that is the need for 100% compliance right first time, and the pressures coming under that are quite significant. And then I think certainly as an industry, the food industry gathers a huge amount of information, but doesn't make great use of it at the moment. And I think for people in that space, there are great opportunities. What that will bring, I just don't know, but there's huge opportunity there at the same time.
And you were saying the factories have a huge amount of information and they gather it. Well, who owns that, or I mean, who will they give access to it, or is it their data?
Oh, it's the factory's data. You'll be quite selective about what information goes out from the data. I suppose most of the data is that if you take go back to the horsemeat scandal, when there was a huge amount of requirement for traceability information, there's probably a factor of 1-2% of the actual data held was all that was needed to be released, but the whole lot of it had to be there in order and stack up for the authorities to do investigations. The amount that was actually required to process the whole thing was relatively small, but the volume of information needed to back it up was quite substantial, just to use one example.
Yeah. Sean, from your point of view then, when you look 3 or 5 years down the line in terms of ICBF and in terms of the industry as a whole, what do you see as more technology coming in?
I suppose, I mean, I'm not sure that there's going to be a major change in the nature of the technology. I think genomic technology especially is going to continue to take over, and I would expect that, in the 5-year time frame, every animal in the country will be genotyped as a matter of routine, and it'll feed back into the farm to fork concept. And I think, there's a great potential there for us to push on that. And it's something that other countries do not have an infrastructure. Even if they wanted to do it, they can't do it. So if we want to use it as a differentiator, now obviously we need to be able to get some return back to farmers in order to be able to take advantage of that. But that's what I would see. And I would see, if you take calf registration 5 years' time, a farmer will tag the calf, put it in an envelope, send it off, and it'll come back and it'll already have the sire and the dam allocated with 100% accuracy.
And probably testing more than BVD, probably a lot more diseases and a lot more different things as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, and able to use the genetic analysis and then be able to provide the information back to farmers. Is this a calf I should keep? Is this a farm calf I should be selling?
We've talked a lot about big data and software, but I suppose going back to the mechanical engineering, there'll probably be still a need for a lot of mechanical engineers looking forward as well.
Absolutely. The systems are still going to be needed, whether it's the systems for milking the cows, handling beef animals, systems in the factories. There's still going to be a need for mechanical engineering, electronic engineering. It's not just the software and the big data.
So we haven't even got into things like drones or self-steering tractors or anything like that. I mean, there were Delta here, James Maloney, the machinery editor, was talking to them before. But I mean, we all agree, or we don't disagree, that technology will play an increasing role in farming in the future and in the industry in the future. I suppose the challenge is to give farmers the information when they need it to make their decisions better, to make them more profitable. Because I was at an ICT conference in the Aviva, and really, it's not about measurement, it's about giving decisions, giving solutions, and increasing profitability to farmers, and that's when technology will come more and more into agriculture. So I suppose we're coming up to our time there now. I know the speakers will be to the right-hand side if anyone wants to talk. I know John and Michael will probably be back at their stands. They're only being given a half-hour pass release before they have to get back. But I'd just like to put our hands together and thank you very much for the three speakers.
Thank you.